No. Dave's impression of feedback.
Ow. I've got one of these acoustic tubes. That hurts.
I've got 2 of the buggers. It says watch the live stream. Oh, there it is. It's coming up.
Of you howling.
Of me howling. Me howling. It's weird because I'm just slightly behind myself in here. What did I press there? In the wrong place. Oh God. Get there, David. That's the best way to do it. There we are. We has a VB and a Sav.
Aye.
Yes, indeed. Say hello, VB.
Hello, VB.
Aye. See, right now, there. Yours is not a Glasgow, isn't it? Oh, is it?
No.
Scottish.
I'm Scottish, aye.
Aye. From where?
I'm from the Spey Valley. Up in the mountains.
Ours here. I thought that was where they sent cats to get done. What are you laughing at, Saf?
Nothing. I'm not laughing at nothing.
Excuse me, Trevor. Memories of DD. Oh, bloody hell.
Oh?
What? And then back.
Glitch.
Ah.
You tell me, I don't know.
I don't know, I didn't know what there was either. Whatever it was, it did it. Now it doesn't.
Twice it's done that. But the health is good.
Did?
What was I saying? Yes. Trev, memories of DD drunk in Lanzarote, that howling. No. No, I wasn't drunk, ever. Pissed, but not drunk.
The gin was drunk. You weren't.
I drank a lot of gin, yes. The gin was... The gin was... The gin... Oh, dear God. The gin was definitely drunk, yes. That's going to be the easiest way. Just 1 year-old, David. and quieten the other thing down. That'll be better. Oh, hang on.
I'm hanging on.
There we are.
Well done.
I thought so.
Well done. 8 out of 10.
Cats.
I feel like I'm on Mallet's mount.
Mallet?
Yeah.
Oh, I wouldn't suit big ears, would I?
No.
No.
Oh, won't say the next thing.
No, don't want big ears. So, hello, chat. Marvellous to see you. It's delightful to say it is. It's absolutely marvellous. If there's anyone else up in the Spey Valley, what? Since when do I speak French? On parle français pour toujours ma vie. Toujours de ma vie.
What?
Qu'est-ce qu'on fait, hein? La plume de ma tante sur le pont d'Avignon.
1 minute. Did that glitch cause sync?
Did what?
Oh, that glitch caused sync issues.
Oh, bollocks. Why do DD's ears look smaller tonight? 1 second delay vid to audio. Well, how the hell do I sort that out?
You have to drop it for about 30 seconds and then bring it back again.
I'll drop it for 30 seconds and
then... micro stutter, you just got all of it.
You what?
Micro stutter, yeah.
I don't know what the hell that was. It's like watching a poorly translated Kung Fu movie. Which Kung Fu said that?
Alright, we can take it live anytime you want.
Is it back up, is it?
Yeah, back up now.
Right.
I don't know if it's back in sync yet.
How soon will you know?
I'll tell you in a second.
Fairy tales can come true. It can happen to you.
No, it's even worse than it was before.
Oh, bloody hell.
Oh,
Should I drop it again?
you can try dropping it again.
Right, well, right, because this will get there, so we'll be gone for about a minute. Tweet everybody, tell them that we'll be gone for a minute, then we'll be back and then we'll start. All right? Thank you. Stream button.
We'll see if that sorts it out.
We're never just near. Like watching an episode of Monkey.
Don't you dare whistle.
I want a cloud. Oh no, I shouldn't have said that.
Okay, you want a cloud? I'll give you a cloud. Give you a cloud.
Yay.
Oh, right, a crowd, Monkey.
Oh,
Come back up.
I know it's not coming back up. Come on.
I've got 5 bars here.
Come on, Google, you can do it.
You can. You can. We have faith in you.
Come on. It says it's got it. It's just not doing anything with it. You're a bugger. It's counting. Oh, brilliant.
Right.
Refreshing the page did well, didn't it?
Yeah, does it make it disappear? Alright, you're back on the live page.
Yeah. Okay.
Right, you're back.
We're all back. Right, let's put the starty thing in. And, yes, very shortly it'll be all very Scottish. Aye. Yes. Okay, 007. And we're here. It's Wednesday night. I'm not Matt Gerish. I'm not. I know. Handsome lad and all of that, but no. It's not Matt. Tonight, Matt's on sabbatical because Ridian's on his honeymoon and Vicky's on Ridian, really. So where we're at tonight is we're going to have a look at what went on in Holyrood yesterday. Yes, yesterday morning. And those of you that are in the know might know that Andy Morrison was up there. Haven't got Andy with me tonight, but I do have a Scots person. It's a Scots person by the name of Richard Ivers, and here he is. There he is. Hello, Richard.
Who? Oh, right, me. Yeah.
Yes.
Hi.
Very budding. Who is sat very deeply in his chair. He's extremely comfortable. And to
Yes.
Richard's right is the effervescent loveliness and bountiful beautyliciousness that is the one and only Sav. You all right, Sav?
I am. I'm just trying to sort out buffering. Anyone that has buffering, you need to refresh your video. But if you're buffering, you probably wouldn't have heard that, so I'll tell you again later.
Yes, I'll tell him again as well. If I change camera, you never know. Hello. Yeah, are you buffering? Has the bottom fallen out of your world? Take X-Lax. And no, just refresh. If anybody's having problems, type in somebody into chat, refresh. Yes. Right, without much more ado, we're going to get into this here video because it takes quite a while. It's an hour and a bit, hour and 20 minutes. So if the dog starts crossing its legs at 10:05, it's not my fault. So here it comes. I'm going to start it from the start, and what I've done is I've left it alone. I've just cut the bit off at the front and the back that didn't ought to be there, and we'll discuss it in depth, or a bit more depth, tomorrow night on the Haze Hour. But I wanted everybody to have a watch at this so you could see what goes on, and it's actually very, very interesting. Sav and VB and I might chime in every so often with, you know, comments. Right, here it comes. Are we sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin.
We now move to agenda item number 3, which, of course, is our first evidence session of the Health, Tobacco, Nicotine, etc. and Care Scotland Bill. And can I welcome to the committee Sheila Duffy, Chief Executive of Ash Scotland, Scottish Coalition of Tobacco. Thank you for your attendance this morning. Professor Linda Bald, Professor of Health Policy, University of Stirling, and Simon Clark, Director of Freedom Organisation for the Right to Enjoy Smoking Tobacco Forest, and Andy Morrison, Trustee, New Nicotine Alliance. Welcome to you all. I haven't had any notification that we are going to make any presentation, so can we move to the first question and take it from there? And I've got my first question from a committee member this morning, is Richard Lyle, to get us started.
Thank you, Convener.
As usual.
Thank you, Convener. A number of months ago, I was able to convince the committee to have a morning session on the NVPs, which is nicotine vapour products. What is your feeling on the suggestion that we look at ensuring that these are not sold to children and that put an age limit on it? And what is your opinion on the factor of advertising?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. I think there's almost universal acceptance that we need age restriction on nicotine-containing products in terms of the responses to the consultation on this bill, but also to bring Scotland in line with the rest of the UK that have committed to introducing an age of sale limit of 18. There isn't really any reason why a never smoking child who's never used a nicotine product should start using nicotine. So I think even amongst the smoking and vaping community, we see strong support for age of sale. So that's the first point. The second point is advertising, which is more difficult. My own view, I spent 17 years doing research on smoking cessation, helping people stop smoking, is that we still need some forms of e-cigarette advertising to encourage current smokers to switch to less harmful products. But I think the team who've drafted this bill have tried to strike a balance, still allowing point of sale, marketing or advertising, while restricting some of the other channels that are not going to be covered by European legislation and might appeal to children. So we may have a longer discussion on that, but those are my starting thoughts on those two questions.
Yeah, I'll back that up as well. What Linda's saying there, we don't want to see under 18s picking up these devices. However, we do have several issues with advertising. We feel that we shouldn't stifle the advertising too much. We want responsible advertising to basically help fight against the tobacco products. We want to give e-cigarettes the leading edge over tobacco products, and therefore would welcome the allowance of responsible advertising.
Anyone else?
Yes, I would just say again, like the other speakers, we'd be opposed to excessive restrictions on advertising for e-cigarettes. It makes sense to encourage people to switch from combustible cigarettes to electronic cigarettes, and as long as people aren't forced to do so. And therefore it seems to be counterproductive if you make those regulations in advertising and marketing too restrictive. In terms of age of sale, yes, clearly they should be restricted. I think there is perhaps an argument to be had as to whether that restriction should be 16 or 18. Up until a few months ago, we were firmly of the opinion it should be 18. But as the more and more evidence comes to the fore, we've seen in recent weeks Public Health England, the Royal Society of Public Health, saying that clearly e-cigarettes are a lot less potentially harmful than combustible cigarettes. It might be quite a courageous stance for the Scottish Government to take, to actually say, well, look, we need to create a clear marker between combustibles and electronic cigarettes, and actually allow people to buy them at 16, because you're always going to get some children who are going to experiment. That's never going to be stopped. And at the moment, there are clearly a considerable number of children who experiment with traditional cigarettes
I have
at
to
the age
say
of
this
16 or
is
17.
really sensible.
And maybe you want to make it
lowering the age down to 16, given
nudge
you can
them
get
towards
RT at 12.
e-cigarettes. There's no evidence that e-cigarettes are a gateway to tobacco. So it's not something we would specifically support. an age limit of 16. But I think it's worth having that discussion, because if you're allowing people to vote at 16, then maybe you should say, okay, they're old enough to make their own decisions about nicotine at 16.
Sheila.
We would support the age restriction to 18 for consistency and because it's the international accepted age for protection. I have real concerns about the advertising. I think it's legitimate to want to make smokers aware of these products and to make them aware that tobacco is, on some estimates, 20 times more harmful. But I think potentially advertising could become a gateway for tobacco companies to reach young people, and we must watch that very carefully given their track record of exploiting advertising and marketing.
I suppose this question is 16 or 18, and the growing idea that harm reduction is better than smoking cigarettes. If it's good for somebody at 19 to help them to get off tobacco, why isn't it good for somebody at 17 to be able to access e-cigarettes as a means of stopping smoking tobacco?
I think you have to strike the balance between trying to support young people who are already using tobacco and giving access to a nicotine-containing product to children who've never smoked. So I think it's a tricky decision about 16 and 18. The reason Cancer Research UK, and that's primarily why I'm here, is on behalf of them. The reason we've supported the age of sale of 18 in our submission is, as Sheila said, largely for consistency with the rest of the UK and also internationally, where you see that that's the age of sale limit that's commonly being adopted. Yeah. And also, I don't think that 16 or 18 is really the priority issue for this bill. There are other much trickier issues within it.
Okay. Anyone else on that? No?
Can I move on to,
yes.
Can I move on to my other question? I'm sure Mr Clark will come in this one. In the bill is regard to smoking in hospital grounds. If you go to most hospitals, standing outside are people having a cigarette. And take, for instance, my own hospital near me, Wishaw Hospital. Based on the regulations that the government wants to introduce, you'd have to go outside the hospital, which would mean near enough a quarter. I've never measured it, but I would say about a quarter-mile walk to the outer periphery of the hospital. I abhor people standing outside the hospital.
They're being sensible, they're being pragmatic, and they're being compassionate.
A number of years ago, we
introduced
introduced the non-smoking in public places, so basically people don't smoke inside buildings. Outside the building, would you agree, Mr Clark, that based on, I noticed on your what you've submitted, would you agree or would you suggest that whilst you agree that maybe smoking outside the building is wrong, that maybe 100 to 200 yards away there should be some form of shelter or whatever in order that people could go to an area to smoke? Because at the end of the day there is, I believe, 20% of the population still smoke. And going to a hospital can be quite traumatic. You're in to see your relation who may have severe health problems not related to smoking, and you come out and you want to have a cigarette. So would you suggest, in your submission, would you suggest that somewhere within the hospital grounds there should be a shelter or something set up out with the entrance to the hospital?
Well, thank you for raising that issue, because it's something we feel very, very strongly about. As you've said, going to hospital as a patient or a visitor can be a very stressful experience. It's also quite stressful for many members of staff. And to ban smoking on all hospital grounds, we think, is totally inhumane. It's totally vindictive. It's petty, far pettier actually than banning smoking in pubs, because at least people can still go outside. I mean, we're still firmly against the current comprehensive smoking ban, but to extend it to the entire hospital site we think is absolutely outrageous. I totally accept that when you go to a hospital, having people standing around the entrance is not a nice sight. It's not particularly nice for people who are walking past them, although I do think that's often exaggerated. But you've got to look at it from a patient's point of view. And if you're a patient, I'm thinking of patients who are not just in for 1 or 2 days, but patients who might be in for 8 or 9 weeks. That might be somebody, for example, an elderly person who's in for a hip replacement. They might be in hospital for 8 or 9 months, have very limited mobility. they're being told that they cannot go outside and smoke anywhere on the hospital grounds. And you have to, for a lot of those people, a lot of patients in hospital, having the odd cigarette is, there's a comfort factor there. It's something they actually look forward to. And deny them that right to have a cigarette anywhere in hospital grounds is totally and utterly wrong. I think it's going to be quite expensive to enforce. We've read newspaper reports in recent months in Scotland of a lot of people simply ignoring smoking bans on hospital grounds. But that's fine for people who are mobile and can go outside. But what about people who are immobile? I had a call recently from the daughter of a woman aged 67 suffering from dementia who was at a psychiatric hospital in Edinburgh. And lots of other patients were able to go outside, but because she was suffering from dementia, she couldn't go out on her own. It was unsafe. And the staff were being threatened with disciplinary action if they took pity on her and took her outside. There's a long history of staff taking people outside so they can have a smoke. That's what they want to do. But now those same staff are being threatened with disciplinary action. So you might have somebody who has a fantastic record of 20, 30 years working for the NHS who could find themselves penalised in some way, maybe even lose their job because they've taken pity on a patient, taken them outside for a smoke. That has to be wrong. Just going back to your specific point, yes, I don't see why hospitals can't have smoking shelters. But if they turn around and say, well, we can't actually afford them, I would say, well, what is wrong with, as you say, smoking 100 yards away from the building? I wouldn't put a particular limit on it. I think this is something where people have to show a bit of common sense. So, yes, let's not have people smoking around the entrance, but anywhere else on hospital grounds, for heaven's sake. They're not putting anybody else's health at risk by lighting a cigarette in the open air. Why should they be forced off hospital grounds, having to walk, as you say, a quarter of a mile, perhaps onto a busy main road? And one item we put into our submission, which I totally accept as an isolated case, but about 8 years ago, there was a nurse who, I believe it was a hospital in Essex, who was forced off hospital grounds to have a smoke, and she was murdered. Now, I'm not saying that that is going to be a regular occurrence, but I think it's something that we have to bear in mind, that you are putting people potentially at risk by forcing them further and further away from hospital grounds just to light a cigarette in the open air. I think it's totally wrong, and as I say, I think it's totally and utterly inhumane, and it goes against the so-called caring NHS.
Yeah, thanks.
I agree with Simon,
we've
totally.
got limited time, and we need to be concise in our questions and concise in our responses. Please, anyone else in response to the perimeter, smoking perimeter? Sheila?
Sorry, I should have made a declaration of Scott 2015 declaration for the record that I and my organisation have no formal or informal financial or in-kind links to tobacco companies, their representatives or vested interests. Apologies for not making that first. I would note, just for the record, that dementia, tobacco use, smoking is a very high risk factor for all forms of dementia. I think the aim in Scotland is to put tobacco out of sight, out of mind and out of fashion. And as part of that, of course, you have to be compassionate with people who are used to smoking and who may have a physical addiction. And the NHS is very good at offering all forms of support to people to try and manage that. And that's important as part of any proposed restrictions.
Anyone else?
I would just like to say that the New Nicotine Alliance is delighted that e-cigarettes have not been brought into this part of the legislation. In other words, they're not going to make it a law, the same as cigarettes. However, we are a little bit disappointed that some of in fact the majority of the NHS buildings have decided to ban e-cigarettes on their grounds along with tobacco.
Yeah, we've had some evidence about that, and I think there is a general consensus that better with an e-cigarette as a cigarette. Is this contradictory? Do people feel that it's a bit contradictory in terms of the banning e-cigarettes alongside tobacco in and around? Does it not send the wrong message? I think we had evidence in the past, if you treat people with an e-cigarette the same as you would someone smoking, then you're sending the wrong message here. Does it actually harm our actions in trying to get people to reduce their smoking.
I mean, I think the bill as it's currently drafted in relation to hospital grounds is very clear that e-cigarettes are not included in that in terms of the enforcement and the penalties that will follow with that. And I think that's absolutely right. I'm very clear that we shouldn't have banned e-cigarette use in NHS grounds in Scotland. I think the Health Board's decision was wrong on that because, as you say, it sends the message that that e-cigarettes are like smoking and that potentially they are as harmful as smoking. But fortunately, this bill doesn't include e-cigarettes in the grounds provisions, and I think that's key. And also, just to state for the record, the bill encouragingly doesn't include any suggestions of banning e-cigarette use uniformly indoors in Scotland. In other words, it doesn't propose extending smoke-free legislation indoors to cover e-cigarettes. And again, in contrast to Wales, that is the right decision because we just do not have the evidence of health harm from second-hand vapour the way we did second-hand smoke.
Is that a view that's supported by everyone? Is there variations in that view from the witnesses here this morning? Yes.
Agreement, but we would like to see the Scottish Government work with partners to issue guidance on policies as appropriate for indoor use of NVPs.
Anyone else? Mr. Clark?
No, I think it would be ludicrous to ban the use of e-cigarettes in hospital grounds. The only way I think we differ is the fact that I'm also against a ban on use of cigarettes in hospital grounds.
Okay. Colin Keir?
Thank you, Convener. It's really actually a clarification of something that was said by Mr. Morrison in the opening question, which was this statement of responsible advertising that you mentioned. And I'm a bit of a, maybe it's just me, but how do we get a definition of what is responsible advertising? What is it? How do we define it?
We're talking about not targeting children, not glamorising the e-cigarette even. Basically to make sure it's aimed at smokers. That's all. Aimed at current smokers to get them off cigarettes or to give them an opportunity to get off cigarettes. We don't want to encourage any non-smokers, whether they be children, adults, whatever.
How would you go about that? Because this is the thing, it's all very well saying responsible advertising. It's the definition, obviously, you're trying to get around, but obviously not everybody's going to necessarily agree with how to do it. And this is the thing, you know, it's the one thing that sort of gets me is always been how do you make sure people understand what responsible advertising is?
I can't answer that question other than to say...
In which case, how could we actually accept there is...
I certainly enjoy this conversation, but it isn't a conversation. You need to allow some of the others who may wish to respond to your initial question.
Apologies.
About how important the bill sees the role of advertising and what its target is. Professor Ball.
Just to comment on that, obviously the Advertising Standards Authority has already put some restrictions in place on e-cigarette advertising, and they adjudicate, so people complain, as you will know, and they can look at the advertising and come to a decision about whether it's irresponsible or not. But I do take the point that it's difficult to differentiate whether marketing, for example, reaches a child or is a responsible advert and it only appeals to an adult. That's actually quite difficult to do. And I think that's why, again, the team have been very careful in terms of this bill allowing the point-of-sale advertising to continue, because you could argue that giving people information about the products at the point of sale and making some effort to continue the appeal of those products to current smokers is still needed. So removing the other forms of advertising, the giant billboards, etc., that might glamorise products, but still providing that information, some form of advertising, I think is really important. So I do think the bill tries to strike the right balance on this issue, very tricky issue.
Anyone else? No.
I think with marketing and promotion, I think we have to be careful that we don't make e-cigarettes promoted purely as a medicinal product, because the reason that e-cigarettes have been so popular with a lot of smokers is because they see them as a recreational product, not a medicinal product. It's true that a lot of users are using them to cut down or quit smoking, but there's also the pleasure aspect to vaping using e-cigarettes. And if you turn all e-cigarette advertising into essentially likes of pharmaceutical advertising, there's a danger that you'll actually drive a lot of potential consumers away. And you won't attract smokers because they'll see it as a medicinal product, which is frankly less attractive than if it's promoted as an attractive recreational product. So we have to be very, very careful here.
Okay. Colin, do you wish to?
No.
Mike, please, and then Richard.
Thank you, Convener. My question, I suppose, is more specifically for Professor Bald, and I just wonder if you're aware of any evidence that cold turkey as a kind of method for cessation of smoking is efficacious. Does that work?
Okay, so if you look at the evidence globally, the vast majority of smokers who stop smoking do it in precisely that way. They do it unaided, it's willpower alone, and that may be because that's how they decide to do it. They're not informed about the alternatives, or they're not available in some countries. But we know that that's probably the worst way to stop in terms of your chances of success. So if you look at the evidence again globally, the best way for somebody to stop smoking is a combination of two things: using a stop smoking aid like nicotine replacement therapy, Champix, or indeed potentially e-cigarettes, and then having support to stop from a nurse, a doctor, somebody trained, even the quit line to help them stop. If you combine those two things, our studies have shown you're about 4 times more likely to be successful than if you use willpower. But I would say it's very important to give people choice, and if people decide that they're going to throw away their pack of cigarettes tomorrow and not touch them again, and that's the way that works for them, great, we have to give lots of routes in.
Great. Can I take it then that you're not in favour of a kind of imposed cold turkey solution then?
No, I mean, again, all the years I've spent in this field, I've seen for pregnant women, people with mental health problems, whatever, lots of different groups, different things work for different individuals. So we need to make sure there are as many routes out of tobacco as possible.
Are you concerned about aspects of this?
We need to let the other witnesses who are here not to witness our proceedings, give them an opportunity if they want to ask, because there are, in terms of the...
Apologies, Convener, I understood that Professor Bald was the authority in this
We have a
aspect
panel of witnesses, mate.
Yeah, apologies.
So we need to give them time if they wish to. Some of them are, looking to me, wanting in, so it's just to give them a full experience. Sheila, do you want to respond, or anyone else want to respond?
Oh, I agree with what Professor Bald said.
Right.
Again, I agree as well, but I think you'll find with electronic cigarettes, the great thing about electronic cigarettes is the diversity of the product. It's not a one-size-fits-all, not like a nicotine patch where you slap the nicotine patch on. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. The same with the gum. It works, it works. It doesn't, it doesn't. Electronic cigarettes, there is such a vast range of these devices out there, and you can mix and match and so forth, and everyone will find a solution. I've not known one person come to me that said, oh, I don't like these, and I've not been able to change that device in some way, shape or form, and within a week or so he stopped smoking. So electronic cigarettes, for me, is the way to go.
Is there any wider evidence on that in terms of the use of different type of devices? Would you like to comment on that, Professor?
If you're happy for me to comment on that. It's a new area. We're seeing new studies published all the time. We've got two randomised controlled trials that show, using very old devices actually, that e-cigarettes are about as effective as a nicotine patch for stopping smoking. Those are the trials. A more recent study showing that people who stopped smoking using electronic cigarette in the UK were 60% more likely to be successful in stopping smoking than willpower alone or buying nicotine replacement therapy over the counter. And then finally, a really interesting new study which differentiated, as Andy's saying, between the basic Cigalite, the ones that look like cigarettes, and what we call tank devices, later generation, that showed that the tanks were more effective in helping people to stop because they allow people to vary the amount of nicotine that's in there. They're more effective in delivering nicotine. So I do agree with Andy that the different devices have different effectiveness. And from a research perspective, actually, we need to study this in the longer term, see what works best for folk.
Mike.
Thank you, Convener. Bringing it just back to the bill, are you concerned that there are aspects of this bill then in prohibiting smoking in hospital grounds which could be seen as a kind of imposed cold turkey solution, and that may actually engender a very negative response in terms of taking forward the agenda of encouraging people to stop through more efficacious methods?
Way to go.
So is this bill running the risk of actually having a contrary purpose to that which Sheila Duffy would like to see. Smoke-free Scotland by 2034 or whatever it is.
I think it very much depends how you do it. I think you have to communicate with people, you have to offer them support, and you have to take them with you. And that was the real success of Scotland's indoor public places legislation.
Forgive me, we've heard that, I've heard this answer before and I've read it in the written evidence. I don't quite see how that gels with saying to people, you know, we've heard some descriptions of people who have just visiting a very sick relative, they're traumatised, or somebody who's just had very bad news from their consultant or whatever, who's a smoker, whose instinct is to light a cigarette to help them cope with whatever, and you're saying, yes, we're offering you long-term cessation treatment, but you're banned from smoking for the next half a mile or whatever. Or in terms of patients who are inpatients who are banned from smoking and absolutely prohibited from doing so, with a real practical problem in terms of being able to smoke, but yet you're saying that you really want to offer long-term cessation.
No, I'm talking about short-term management in terms of habit, and if there's a physical addiction. That's the kind of support that we need to be offering people. But I think it is a real myth, and it's one that the tobacco companies perpetuate, that smoking relieves stress. And if you look at the research, actually there's an inverse relationship, and former smokers and never smokers report better well-being and less stress than current smokers.
She's got no idea about why a smoker would smoke a fag at a time like that.
Answer your question. You've got a range of people, a range of views here. They all want to participate.
Sorry, Convener, I was just mindful of the fact that you've told us throughout this meeting that we're short of time.
Well, you have had more than your fair share, Mr. Mackenzie, but we will. There are people who on the panel who want to respond to your question.
I think
Professor Ball.
The hospital grounds element of this bill is complex. I think that those of us working in the field would agree that having smoking in the very place where people go to get well, even if it's slightly outside the building, is not compatible with the NHS. We're spending millions of pounds trying to treat smoking-related disease. So that's the first principle. But I guess the second principle is that when you look at what we know internationally about how to make new smoke-free policies work, even if they include the grounds, they need three things. They need a good policy, they need good enforcement, and they need good communication with the public about what they're for and why it's happening. Now, those may be issues for the regulations rather than for the legislation, but I do think they're important things to keep in mind. And if we are going to go down this route, I slightly disagree with Sheila. I don't think we're actually doing enough in the NHS to offer people alternatives to help them deal with their nicotine withdrawal if they're forced to not be allowed to smoke, including in the grounds. I think we could do a lot more actually on that.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I'll just repeat what I said earlier. I think it's totally wrong to ban smoking in all hospital grounds. I think it is inhumane. I understand why hospitals don't want to appear to encourage people to smoke, but we've got to be pragmatic about this. We've got to live in the real world, not some utopian smoke-free world where nobody gets comfort from lighting up. The reality is, whatever Sheila says, a great many people enjoy smoking and they get comfort from it, particularly in stressful situations like hospitals.
Would Professor Ball take us to the next stage? Do you believe that this bill and this, this process here and the implementation, the expected implementation of this bill, confirms those three key elements that you mentioned?
I think that the way the bill is drafted tries to strike the right balance, but I do think that the specifying exactly what the perimeter around the buildings is going to be, how that's enforced, all those aspects are very important. We learned that from smoke-free, and my understanding is actually those are aspects for the regulations, the specificity of that, rather than the bill itself. So I'm pointing out that's going to be challenging. Yeah.
The enforcement as well.
And the enforcement. Yeah. From my reading, it's not clear who's going to enforce. Although I welcome this in principle, it's not clear who's going to enforce this extension of smoke-free.
Really shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all regulation on smoking outside, because NHS hospital grounds vary enormously in size. So surely it should be left to the the chief executive or the people who are administering that particular hospital to make their own decisions, not have it imposed on them by central government.
No one else? Thank you. Now have Rhoda, followed by Richard.
Thank you. Going back to e-cigarettes and how they compare with, I think, ordinary cigarettes, I think everyone is clear that they are more healthy, but a couple of comments. Some of the evidence we received, and I'm sorry, I can't remember who provided this, was that only one brand of e-cigarette has been approved as nicotine replacement therapy, and that's not available. Is that the case?
It's not actually an e-cigarette. There's a device called Voke, which is more like a nicotine. It's more like an asthma inhaler that's made by Nicoventures, a branch of British American Tobacco that has been granted a medicinal license in the UK, but it's not yet come to market. But it's not really an e-cigarette. But that's the only one we have. There are no electronic cigarettes that are available as medicines anywhere in the world. As licensed medicines.
It seems to me that one way around all of this, if it is so successful in dealing with nicotine addiction, then therefore it surely should be registered as a medical device. And I've always been a little concerned about the reluctance of those who are making e-cigarettes to have them registered. And I hear, you know, yes, of course they sell better if you market them as recreational devices, but that also appeals to non-smokers if you do that. Surely if we're talking about smoking cessation and the addiction to nicotine, surely it would be better that they were treated totally differently rather than being sold as recreational products.
So, shall I start, or no?
I think we'll put Andy in the spot here, I think.
Yeah, the main problem with medicinal regulation, apart from the cost of making the companies jump through hoops to get this through all the various stages that they've got to go through, is that it is not a one-size-fits-all. You could have a medical device, but it would be about as effective as any other form of NRT. Like, some people get on okay with patches, some don't. If you've only got the one type of device, then it basically, it's just not good enough. The way electronic cigarettes work is because of that diversity. We need to keep the diversity. We need to keep the development of the product going forward. I mean, we started off with cigalites just a couple of years ago, the little ones that look like cigarettes, and I showed you a couple of seconds ago what we're on to now. We're on to really, really powerful devices that are very, very effective, and that's been consumer driven. I don't think that if you're going to put it through a medical process to get whatever the end process, the end product is, it's just not going to be. It's not going to cut it at the end of the day. It'll do for some people, but if you keep it as a consumer product, let the consumers drive the innovation, then it's working an awful lot better that way.
An issue slightly out with this bill, because the European Tobacco Products Directive, which is intended to come in next spring, will introduce a two-tier system where those devices that contain more than 20 milligrams per milliliter of nicotine will have to go down the medicinal licensing route, and the other products will be allowed to remain as consumer products. So that already exists. It's been a very difficult journey in the UK. We recommended, the committee that I chaired at NICE almost 3 years ago now, that there be medicinal e-cigarettes. But the MHRA process is so cumbersome and complex that very few companies have been willing to put forward a device for medicines regulation, including the pharmaceutical industry, who have not been interested. So the only one that's come through is this single tobacco industry funded device. So we kind of have a system which is very complex and disincentivizes it at the moment, but then we also have European legislation which is going to make this a requirement. So this is going to change, and I guess this bill, which focuses on the wider issues around e-cigarettes, will just have to take into account that changing context.
Can I just add one thing? And actually, Linda knows a lot more about it than I do, but I think we've got to make this leap away from seeing nicotine itself as harmful. Public Health England, only in the last couple of weeks, has declared quite authoritatively that nicotine is no more harmful than caffeine. Nicotine, of course, is very closely associated with the tobacco, so people leap to this conclusion that nicotine itself is harmful. But we've got to get away from that and see nicotine itself as is not a bad thing, and perhaps Linda could add to that a bit.
Well, we know a survey that the Royal Society for Public Health did earlier this month. About 90% of non-smokers in the UK believe that nicotine is harmful, and 75% of smokers believe it's harmful. Yet we provide nicotine replacement therapy to pregnant women. And the reason we've allowed that since 2005 is because nicotine, when delivered in a cleaner form, is not, as Simon says, is not a harmful drug. And certainly the harm caused by tobacco is the 4,000 other chemicals in combustible tobacco, not the nicotine. So it is this tricky issue, and it probably contributes to some of the public misunderstanding about the relative risks of e-cigarettes versus tobacco cigarettes. Because as soon as people hear the word nicotine, they think that it's potentially damaging. Not risk-free, but certainly as an alternative to tobacco, far, far safer.
Yes, Rhoda, go on.
And just on that point, I think it's widely understood that that's the case, but nicotine's highly addictive. Surely it's not a good thing to be addicted to something.
I'm not so sure that nicotine is as addictive as people are making out. It's certainly addictive within cigarette smoke, but I think we're beginning to find out now that on its own it's not that addictive. It's about as addictive as caffeine. And I've noticed that. I've gone through the process of switching from tobacco to vaping. I've just come off a 4.5-hour flight from Madeira, and not once did I have the feeling I want to tear my hair out because I can't have a cigarette. I did have my vaping gear on me, but it never bothered me in the slightest that I couldn't vape on the plane.
That is interesting. I mean, nicotine in nicotine replacement therapy isn't dependence forming. People don't get hooked generally on NRT. You don't see people continuing to buy it or use it in large, non-smokers. There's about 0.5% of the population in the UK who are never smokers say they use nicotine replacement therapy. If it was attractive, more would use it. But we're also seeing that with e-cigarettes. Nicotine, yes, is dependence forming, but it's primarily in tobacco it's dependence forming. And we think that it's some of the other constituents in tobacco that work with the nicotine to really hook people in the cigarette. Within e-cigarettes, the evidence we're seeing now is that people are not as reliant on the nicotine in the e-cigarette as they are when they're smoking. But again, we need longer term studies to really understand that relationship in e-cigarettes.
Yeah, I mean, I welcome Andy's experience, and I think that is the experience of many people using NVPs. But we also have to recognise that cigarettes are as addictive as they are because they've been consciously engineered by tobacco companies over a number of years and with a lot of investment. And we have to recognise the strong footprint that tobacco companies have in the NVP market, which is likely to become stronger after the Tobacco Products Directive regulations take effect.
I suppose it takes us to another aspect of this in terms of the register of those who would be selling, I'll say, e-cigarettes. They would need to, again, register, I think, as in the same basis as someone who was selling tobacco. There would be the consequences of selling to under 18s would be similar to selling tobacco to an under. It seems a bit disproportionate if we apply. The bill suggests that we should be applying the same sort of restrictions and penalties there, doesn't it? And would that be disproportionate, given the discussion that we just had there, that we're not dealing with, as an addictive product?
We would like to see a totally separate register, but I understand that may be a costly process. It would be. I've had notification from the Scottish Government that the outward-facing part of it will try to distinguish between NVPs and tobacco. We would like to see it totally separate, but if it's not possible, then.
Any other views on that?
That I've certainly made it very clear that I don't think it should be the same register. I can see that the idea of a register is useful for enforcing, giving trading standards a tool to enforce the underage sales issue, which we've all agreed is important. But I don't think it should be the same register as tobacco, and certainly it shouldn't be presented as the same register because they're not the same products. We need to do much more to get rid of tobacco from Scottish society, and definitely not focus on trying to get rid of e-cigarettes because they potentially will save lives for some people.
Sheila?
I think there have been two advantages to having a register of those retailing tobacco, and one is that enforcement officers know who's selling it where and can engage and educate, and the other is that we can, it's access for academics to see how things change. Now this is a very fluid, emerging, changing market, and I think that data would be very helpful. But I agree with the points that Linda and Andy have made, that for it to look different when a retailer is going in to register may help just to distinguish the products.
Richard Simpson.
Yes, the Rule 8 in the Advertising Standards Association is marketing communications must not encourage non-smokers or non-nicotine users to use e-cigarettes. So, you know, if they're so safe, if they're completely harmless, then, you know, why have we got that why are we not putting any restrictions on this at all? I mean, it seems to me, you know, that we need to recognize the cultural history of cigarettes, that, you know, they started off as something that was, apart from King James, you know, was thought to be very reasonable and was promoted as improving health. And, you know, my father as a GP who smoked, you know, said it was good for the lungs, you know, and encouraged the lungs to exercise. We've been through this once, you know, this is a very new area. We really don't know. And I do understand that there are some studies in the States already suggesting that the consumption of nicotine by this method, not by patches or other methods,
we really don't know, apart from all the science, do we,
not
guys?
entirely free from harm.
No, there's no science. We really don't
tell us
know.
if there's any research on that, but also if the others could comment on whether this is a reasonable restriction. And I suppose my last bit on the restrictions is, should advertising within a certain distance of schools be actually banned in order to not encourage youngsters to take this up?
The reason why I welcome some restrictions on advertising is precisely for that. There are no good reasons why a never smoking child should start using these products, and we all actually agree on that point, because you know, nicotine is still dependence forming. Certainly it is in cigarettes. The other aspect, of course, is an inequalities one, Richard, is, you know, why should kids spend their money on these devices? They don't need them. So we do have to protect children from uptake. And I think that's why some of these, the idea around restricting advertising is important. What will happen in the future and how they evolve, Sheila's already highlighted that. I agree, there's a range of questions. So I think what we're seeing here is an attempt to balance risk and benefit, not prohibit current smokers from accessing these products, and in fact potentially encourage that, but also try and keep an eye on the protection responsibility that we have.
Says it all for me, it's proportionate to risk.
The question is what the risk is. We just don't know, do we?
Yeah.
Do we know?
Well,
I mean, it's so new. Do we actually? Are there any studies at all on
how the risks are and the minimal?
The types of research, Richard, that we have, the lab-based studies that have tried to look at the constituents in e-cigarettes. What you find is that they don't have these tobacco-specific nitrosamines that you know are carcinogenic, but they do have very low levels of some of the harmful toxins that we've seen in tobacco, like lead and cadmium, acetaldehyde, but at very, very low levels. So I'm not saying they're risk-free, but they're certainly far, far less harmful than tobacco. I think we can be relatively confident about that. There are questions without going on in detail about, as you know, long-term use, inhalation into the lungs, long-term exposure. We know about propylene glycol, but we maybe don't know about some of the other constituents. But these are more research questions. I think if we are too restrictive, we potentially miss a public health prize, which is people switching. But I agree, it's not straightforward.
So we need good research, really. The last bit of my question, Chair. Oh, sorry.
Well, that a wee bit, because you know, Linda mentioned earlier that what's the difference, she explained to me, the layman, of giving a nicotine patch to a pregnant woman than using an e-cigarette.
Yeah, yes, I'm not supposed
Richard
to do it.
Richard will correct me if I'm wrong, as the clinician and one of the clinicians in the room. Basically, it's pharmaceutical grade nicotine in the nicotine patch. It's the method of delivery has been rigorously tested in terms of safety and efficacy. The difference with e-cigarettes, if we leave aside the nicotine, which I don't think we really need to worry about in e-cigarettes, it's the other constituents in the e-cigarettes and the way that the device delivers nicotine to the body that may have some risks. We're not seeing really any evidence of that at the moment. But there's propylene glycol, there's flavourings that you will have heard of, and the flavourings have a number of constituents. So I do think Richard's right. There are longer-term questions about potentially the impact of use. But when the contrast is with smoking, where we know so clearly what the harm is, I do believe we can be confident about far lower risk.
Sheila.
I think Richard's absolutely right. We do not have good long-term knowledge yet about the effects of NVP products. And I think there are some concerns when you are taking things in through the lungs as opposed to through the skin or through the stomach. It's a slightly different agency. And I think, to me, these things are fairly obviously not as dangerous as tobacco, but as we said, that doesn't make them completely safe. And there have been one or two flavourings that there have been immediate risks attached to, such as butterscotch, dacetyls and cinnamon, and particularly when you heat them at high temperatures, which is another factor that's coming in. So I think this is probably one to watch very carefully, but agree with Linda that tobacco is undoubtedly dangerous, incredibly dangerous, and that is something that we have to keep our eyes on throughout this. How does it impact on tobacco use?
She's not even close to being on side, isn't Duffy?
Just with reference to the flavourings problems, the consumers are actually dealing with these kind of problems as they happen. As soon as a problem is identified, that stuff gets off the market straight away and it's replaced with something that's more acceptable, a lot more acceptable. So yeah, I mean the risk is probably 95% less. There is room for improvement, but again the devices are improving as we go along. We've now got heat protection in the devices, in that you can't heat it to the temperature that's going to start producing formaldehydes and so forth. So with it still being a consumer-driven product, we are addressing these problems as we go along. I dare say there will be other problems that will come up, but it's certainly not going to be anywhere near the scale of the problems caused by smoking combustible tobacco.
Is there anything, I mean, one of the things that concerns me is the tobacco industry are buying up VPNs. They're not doing it for the good of our souls. They're doing it on a profit-based motive, and good luck to them in that, and then that's their job. But what's to stop them actually putting in the back end, the additives that previously addicted people strongly? You know, given that we're saying that nicotine consumed by this method as others is maybe less addictive than tobacco, what is to stop them actually creating the market, strengthening their market by adding in some of the additives that they've added in before, which are so damaging?
I absolutely agree with you. They are very effective at getting around whatever restrictions are put in their way, and they have huge resources behind them. The European Tobacco Products Directive is requiring, both for the consumer product primarily, not the medicinal product, which will have to go through the licensing route, for contents to be clearly described, for the development of the devices and how, you know, what the different constituents in them are to be more clearly labelled. And it's actually a very complex document, what they're going to have to declare. Now, whether that will deal adequately with that issue or not, I don't know. But that is part of the EU TPD.
Thank you.
Anyone else, Andy?
Yeah, I can also tell you that the tobacco industry products are useless. They are absolutely hopeless. No seasoned vapour would bother with the tobacco company products that they're putting on in the market at the moment. They just don't cut the ice, so to speak. They're useless. And maybe that's deliberate, I don't know. Could well be deliberate from the tobacco company's point of view. They don't want them to work. So, generally speaking, anyone that knows enough about vaping will not buy one of these tobacco products, and they're few and far between, to tell you the truth.
Well,
Sheila's going to respond as well.
Yes.
There you go. So you give them a chance, they will respond.
Yeah, I share Andy's concern that tobacco companies may consciously try to dominate the market and that their products are likely to be less effective in delivering what people want, and that they will be trying to encourage dual use rather than cessation because they make more profit from combustible tobacco products.
Anyone else?
Well, I'm not here, as you know, to represent the tobacco industry, but I think that's a load of nonsense that they're going to produce a product that nobody wants. What a load of nonsense. I mean, look at it this way. The tobacco companies have a lot of money to put into research and development. E-cigarettes will get better and better. And looking at it from the outside, I would have thought that nobody is in a better position to pour money into research and development than the large tobacco companies. But I'm not here to defend them. Going back to Richard's initial point, I just wanted to say that the implication of what he was saying is that we should live in a risk-free world. Well, we don't live in a risk-free world. I think the important thing is to give the consumer as much information as possible about the health risks of tobacco, the health risks of using e-cigarettes or any other consumer product. Ultimately, it comes down to a word that Linda used a bit earlier, choice. Let the consumer make their choice based on an informed choice, based on all the available information. It's their choice. It shouldn't be the choice of politicians to decide how they're going to live their lives.
As I was told. We've got Dennis now, please.
As a politician who's concerned about health and well-being of everyone in our society, do you think this bill strikes the balance? For instance, do we have within the bill enough there for the exemptions to be flexible enough, say within health boards, to have areas designated as potentially maybe a smoking area, because it is seen as it is the preferred route for that person's health and well-being, albeit maybe going through a cessation programme or whatever, but maybe due to mental illness, psychiatric conditions, whatever, it is felt that we need those specific areas within the health boards. And do you think the enforcement aspect that we're talking about is proportionate? I seem to think that perhaps sometimes enforcing can be overzealous. Just wonder if you have any points with reference to the bill, taking on the Professor's aspect of policy, enforcement and information. Professor, maybe you would like to start.
I mean, I guess I feel more strongly about the e-cigarette elements of this legislation and feel more able to speak to the evidence on that than the hospital grounds issue, which I said earlier I think is a tricky, complex issue. I do think the way this, I think the principle of a smoke-free area around a hospital is very important, and the power to enforce that in an effective way, which is what this bill tries to do, is very important. But just to state again that I think drafting the regulations of this aspect is going to be really the crucial thing to get that balance right.
Yeah, complex, yeah. But do you feel that in the interest of a person's overall health and well-being, if it is determined that the patient should be permitted to continue to smoke, there should be a designated area, and mainly within I'm talking about significant mental health or psychiatric conditions.
I can't see that it would ever be able to be argued that smoking tobacco is in the interests of anyone's health. I think we need to look at what that smoking is doing for that person and what can be offered. And it may be, for example, in cases of mental health issues, that some form of NVP could be an acceptable alternative, as it has been for a number of smokers.
With respect, we're talking about well-being rather than health, and a lot of patients' immediate well-being may actually be helped by being allowed to have a cigarette outside a psychiatric hospital or a standard NHS hospital. And I can't repeat myself enough. I think it's petty, vindictive and inhumane to say to people, no, you cannot have a cigarette anywhere on hospital grounds. That's totally and utterly wrong. And that's where I think the bill does go too far.
What about with regard to enforcement? Do you think that we would have the appropriate guidance and information to enable enforcement officers to carry out, I suppose, their duties within, so they'll continue in the hospital grounds?
Well, the problem is, in terms of enforcement, A, it's going to cost money. You maybe have to employ tobacco control wardens. You may have to put in CCTV cameras. I mean, we've even heard of some hospitals putting in a sound system so that if the CCTV camera catches somebody lighting up in the bushes, a big voice comes out of the ether saying, put that cigarette out. I mean, this is a ridiculous way, surely, to run a hospital. Surely hospitals have far better things to do. And we did a recent poll through Populous, and we asked people what their priorities were for hospitals. And I have to say, tackling smoking came last in a list of 10 issues. There were other issues that were far more important to the public, like reducing A&E waiting times and general waiting times, having more doctors and nurses. These are far more important issues than whether somebody lights a cigarette on hospital grounds. And just the other thing on enforcement is that if this is made a statutory offence and somebody tries to stop somebody smoking on hospital grounds, what are they going to do? Are they going to, I mean, if it's a visitor, you can order them off the premises. If it's a patient, what's going to happen? Are they going to be ordered off the premises, or are they going to be manhandled? We're getting into very difficult areas here. If you try and physically stop somebody smoking on hospital grounds, that could be seen as assault. So let's be careful. We're going down a very dangerous route here.
NHS boards in Scotland have unanimously taken the decision already to make their grounds smoke-free, in line with the Scottish Government's last tobacco control strategy, which had that as an objective within it. I think this bill tries to provide the basis for actually enforcing that. In other words, giving that voluntary decision that they've taken teeth. And that's my understanding of what the spirit of this is. If it proceeds, there are a number of countries, other countries other than the UK, who've successfully implemented smoke-free hospital grounds, and I think there's potentially a great deal that we could learn from them.
Good. What are those countries that you...
Well, both prisons and hospitals. Canada is a good example to look at. Some states in Australia or other places, and also parts of Scandinavia where you see good examples of smoke-free hospitals and grounds.
Sheila, did you want to come in?
Just briefly to say that YouGov polling that we commissioned last year showed that 73% of Scottish adults supported the proposal that smoking should end in hospital grounds.
No one else. Richard Lyle.
Yes. Can I come back and Mr. Clark, can you stay back on this one? I'd like the other three witnesses to come in. Can we get real on this bill? You know, at the end of the day, yes, I agree that smoking outside a hospital people shouldn't do it, and shouldn't litter the place, they shouldn't crowd, and sometimes actually you have to at 4 o'clock trying to get in to visit a loved one, you're trying to get by people who are standing there puffing away. But can I say that there may be a flaw or an opportunity in this bill? The Scottish Government writes in policy memorandum to the bill that it has chosen the option that it will ban smoking around buildings, but would allow exceptions to the ban to be made in regulations. It states that this option complements existing smoke-free policies, which will take a balanced, more realistic, more compassionate and safe approach. I'm a smoker. I agree that people shouldn't smoke outside the hospital, but should we not make it the point that Mr. Clark has been quite forceful on, and the point I'm trying to make is maybe 100-yard, 200-yard radius within the hospital entrance, that people should be able to smoke there. Now, if I go into Wishaw car park, at the hospital in the car park, I can sit. My wife doesn't want me to do this, by the way, and I don't do it now. I can smoke my car. You can't do anything about that. And I'm within the curtilage of the hospital grounds. I'm in the hospital grounds, but I'm in my own car, so we won't even go there. But the point is, should it not be that we say within 100-yard, 200-yard or 300-yard radius? And the point you made earlier on, Professor, all these notices are up in hospital grounds now. Don't smoke. They're totally ignored. What I want is to have a situation on both sides that we respect people do still want to smoke, but we respect that people who don't want to smoke and in order to ensure that people don't crowd an entrance, that people should respect that and move away from the entrance, have a designated area. Don't spend money to put up a shelter, by the way, but have a designated area that people can exercise, let's be honest about it, their human right to do as they wish, to have a cigarette. And I'd like the other three witnesses, apart from, I know what Mr. Clark would come back and say it for half an hour. I've went on long enough. Can I ask the three witnesses?
Enforcement.
Should we not have a 200-yard radius and let people smoke?
I mean, the call for smoke-free hospital grounds and the policy for smoke-free hospital grounds didn't come from my organisation, Ash Scotland. It came from clinicians and hospitals who I think have seen the pain caused to people's lives and people's families by diseases caused by tobacco. So I think the magnitude of this epidemic, which is responsible for the early deaths of some 13,000 adults in Scotland every year, shouldn't be underestimated. To me, it seems that the enforcement in a defined perimeter will address some of the concerns that you've raised and is a good starting point. I suppose the danger in creating areas for smoking is that you are seen to be acknowledging and permitting something that is so damaging to people's lives.
Anyone else? Richard? Anyone else?
I'd rather not talk about smoking, quite honest.
You know, again, I have to get real. One in three people have cancer or get cancer. And a lot of people, as I said to you earlier, I smoke. You know, but I've had a lot of friends who have died with cancer that have never smoked. You know, we honestly, I want to see this bill work. I want to ensure that what's happening in hospitals doesn't, but we have to get real. You know, why bring in something that, you know, if I walk down Sauchiehall Hall Street and I drop my cigarette end, I can face a £60 fine. I think it's up to £80 now, I'm not sure. Right? I accept that. But if I'm going to a hospital to see a loved one or whatever, and we see it, we see people, I seen it during the time that I worked with the NHS out of our service for 2.5 years, and saw people come out of that hospital crying. The loved one had just died, and the first thing they did was they opened a cigarette packet, shaking and having a cigarette to calm themselves down. Now, if we're going to turn around and say we're anti-smokers, well, let's do away with smoking. Let's lose the millions of pounds that people get, the government gets in tax. Right? If you want to do away with smoking, do away with smoking. Right? But we have to get real. We have to convince people. We convince people not to smoke inside premises because it's harmful. People now accept that. We've got to.
We need to get to the question, Richard.
Yeah, well, we've got
the question it seems to be focusing on is enforcement. We already have health board policy that is being ignored. We have public revulsion of not just clinicians who are treating people as a consequence of many times of a lifetime of smoking, but we've got revulsion in people visiting the hospital and having to go through a gauntlet of people smoking in the entrances to our hospital. That's what my casework reflects. You know, so we've got a government bill that seeks to do that. You know, do we need to? You know, are we going too far to fine people in hospital grounds who are who smoke in hospital grounds or in areas where they're clearly not allowed to? Should we be fining them on the spot? Or?
But just to come back to the point I made earlier, there's no point having these current restrictions if they don't work. I mean, it makes a mockery of the time, money and effort spent in the signage and everything else. And the spirit, as Sheila said, the reason, the push for this has come from clinicians and others who do not want that big group of people around the periphery of the building, the litter, all the other things associated with that. So by saying let's have at least some of the grounds covered by a smoke-free policy that's enforceable and has penalties associated with it, we can successfully implement that. So I think that's the spirit of it. But the point I would make is the detail of how big that perimeter is And exactly what that involves is an issue for the regulations, and I don't think it's straightforward.
And there's the other side, Richard, of this, as I notice in hospitals, just as I see sometimes with pubs and clubs, that people are outside the building but not stop smoking. And I see staff members now out on the street outside the hospital perimeter having a cigarette before they go into work. And I'm coming back to that question about actually dealing with this, and I wonder, you mentioned earlier, as well as the punitive measures that they have, because those staff certainly face punitive action if they smoke on ground. They can be disciplined, they can be sacked, dismissed, etc. But about that gap that you mentioned, about the support that health boards give to staff members and indeed patients who may be in for a short or medium term, about how what alternatives can be given to them and supported in them when they have an addiction.
So we have NICE guidance, which doesn't directly apply to Scotland, on smoking cessation in acute mental health and maternity hospitals. And my understanding is the pathway that recommends is not widely implemented in Scotland. So there's much more we could do to give people other products, like nicotine-containing products, to help them deal with withdrawal and use those if they want when they're going outside as well. Those are licensed products, much more we could do. But I also think, importantly, there is a place for NVPs in this as well. We shouldn't, and that's why it's so important not to ban nicotine e-cigarette use in NHS grounds, because an alternative for a staff member, of course, is not just a nicotine patch, it's an e-cigarette as well. So I do think those alternatives and that support are really crucial.
Okay. Have we any other questions for our witnesses this morning? Mike?
Thank you, Convener. I was hoping to get to this point earlier, and it seems to me to be fundamental to the question that the legislation is trying to address. Is there any evidence to suggest that passive smoking in the open air presents a tangible health risk?
Can I come in? No, sorry, go on, Linda.
Yeah, I mean, not if you're far away from the smoker, it doesn't. If you're in very close proximity to the smoker, you're going to get that side stream drift the way as you would indoors. And that's why, you know, we don't want any environments, including some outdoor environments, where people are close to smokers and can be impacted by that side stream drift, which is important. Yeah.
I must admit, I'm not aware that there's any evidence that lighting up in the open air is harmful to anybody, even if you're standing quite close to them, because as soon as you light up in the open air, it's massively diluted. Even a tiny little bit of wind is going to blow it away. I do think people are now very, very precious about walking past somebody in the street if they're smoking a cigarette. Quite often, it's not the smoke that's bothering them, it's the smell. We can't go around banning things because we don't like the smell of it. But what's happened, I think, since the smoking ban came in, is that people are now very sensitive to even a whiff of smoke in a way that they weren't before, because they were used to it. So now, people sort of complain if they have to, they run the gauntlet of going past smokers outside hospitals. I agree with Richard. I think basically we shouldn't have people smoking directly outside the entrance to a hospital. But when people use terms like running the gauntlet of people smoking outside, I don't know what world they're living in. I'm a non-smoker. I've never smoked. And honestly, in my average day now, I can't think of when I'm actually exposed to somebody lighting a cigarette in the open air. If I'm walking down the street, I'm not even aware that they're smoking, or if I was, I could just move around them. It's complete and utter nonsense. As long as you're on your feet and you're mobile, then I really don't see what the problem is. I understand why smoking is banned in outdoor stadiums, because if you're in a seat and you can't move, then yes, even if you're in the open air, it's not very pleasant being stuck right next to somebody who's smoking. And that would actually go for vaping as well, blowing clouds of vapour into your face. But if you're in an open concourse on a sports stadium, you can move.
I think we're getting the point, Mr. Clark.
Sheila, do you want to contribute to this?
I don't think exposure to tobacco smoke would be the main argument in this case. There are limited examples where you don't have airflow, where you've got open windows and smoke is drifting in, where it could be a concern.
Okay.
One point on that, because I've heard the argument used quite a lot, smoke drifting in through windows. Well, I've not been in a hospital ward where somebody's been smoking outside. I have been in a hotel and people have been standing outside smoking. And I tell you, it's not smoke drifting into my window that's the problem. It's them chatting too loudly so you can't get to sleep. The idea that smoke is drifting into people's windows when they're smoking outside, I'm sorry, again, this is just hyperbole.
Yeah, it does upset some people. Going back to my case, one of the children, the sick kids, the hospital in Glasgow, people outside there were children very seriously ill, smoking below the window. They might be chatting as well and smoking getting in the window. I've had casework that represented that. So people are affected at different levels. I just throw that in as
there are
an
studies.
example.
I mean, I agree with Sheila that the main rationale for that is not around health harm from secondhand smoke in outdoor areas, but there are definitely studies that look at, for example, drift of smoke between an outdoor smoking area and an outdoor eating area, where they have been able to measure whether people are exposed to that when they're in close proximity to the outdoor smoking area. So there is some data. It does happen, but the main arguments are not so much the health harm arguments, but the other arguments around taking tobacco out of society, less visibility, children's exposure, etc.
Beer gardens are one of the things that has been researched in Australia.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think also anyone who walks from Waverley has to go through a cloud of smoke within 20 yards of the Waverley station every morning when you come down from Parliament. If you're an asthmatic, I have to say, Mr. Clark, then I think it isn't the smell.
All of this, isn't it? When you think about
it, the smoke.
That's the problem they caused by banning smoking indoors. They've pushed everybody outside where people have got to run the gauntlet.
Your arguments are overly strong.
I mean, seriously, they've caused the problem and now they don't know how
I
to
just
fix
wondered
it.
then, and just to tease out this
the people, exactly right.
that yes, and I can accept that in certain circumstances there will be a health argument to be made about passive smoking if it's concentrated. I just wondered though if there's been an analysis. I mean, Dr. Simpson mentions walking down from Waverley Station, and vehicles have been largely excluded from Waverley Station because of the air quality. And air quality is a problem in Edinburgh generally. And what I'm interested in is a scientific risk-based approach to this. So what, and perhaps Sheila Duffy can answer this, in terms of your concerns about the risks to health through passive smoking in the open air, how does that compare with the health risk due to poor air quality in a lot of our cities as a result of traffic fumes, so that we can get a sense of proportion over this issue?
Right. Well, I would say there are specific examples, for example, Victoria Hospital, where the windows tilted and people smoking directly outside by the building, the smoke was going into the maternity ward. If you're asking me about vehicle pollution, there is a study I'm aware of. I would have to look up the details and send it to the committee. But there is a study that compares vehicle exhaust with tobacco smoke.
That would be very interesting.
No, good. I mean, the bill, of course, doesn't propose to ban smoking in open public areas. It stops short of any of that. Not yet, I hear from the hecklers beside me, but we'll see. A lot of revisionism going on this morning. If we've got no other questions from the committee, can I extend the committee's thanks for your attendance here this morning, all the time you've given, and the oral and written evidence that we've received. Thank you very, very much indeed.
So there you go. That was the proceedings in Holyrood. The whole thing, unedited, unexpurgated, just the whole thing as it was, completely as it was. So, just very quickly, what did you two make of that?
It was a very mixed bag, wasn't it? There was some really, really positive stuff, some very, very interesting stuff, and then there was some guff.
Yeah, that would be the woman in the red jacket.
Yeah, I agree. There was lots of... It was very detailed, unlike many of these meetings you see. And lots of argument, basically, between members. But you can see the differences in people's opinions amongst the politicians. You had your wee prohibitionists sitting there, and the ones that are more liberal. And now you're seeing their colours.
Yeah.
And yeah, and then there was Sheila Duffy.
Yeah.
Yeah, she talks a good fight sometimes, doesn't she?
Yeah.
But you can hear the real kind of thing coming through. I mean, who else would have brought up the formaldehyde studies that were so widely discredited? Why on earth would she feel the need to do that? That just struck me as being, she was trying to be, I think, extremely balanced and sit on the fence, and I think she failed miserably.
She's too smug to sit on the fence. Yeah.
Well, I think that's just an unfortunate happenstance of her facial qualities. I've got to be really careful how I kind of mention any of this, because, you know, I just don't want to say Botox.
No, definitely.
Sav, if you were living in Scotland, how would you feel about what you'd seen?
It's quite positive from the fact that they're actually willing to talk about it that openly like that. That I like. But I find it a little troublesome, some of the, it's bad for you, it's just going to be bad for you, and no moving away from that. But I do think they're off to a really good start, and Andy did some fantastic work up there.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, you know, all kudos to Andy, and I think he did the right thing to say he wasn't going to talk about smoking when he was there on behalf of the NNA.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that you know, that's great. I'm not so sure that I would have been able to hold back, frankly, but then that's libertarianism for you, isn't it? Thank you two for joining me. It's been quite educational watching this whole thing.
It has.
Yes.
And I've got to say, somebody did say in chat that they wished, you know, you would see more of this in England. There's going to be something like this next week, actually a week today, the 9th of September. The all-party parliamentary group on e-cigs meets, and I'm going down to London, and I shall have my say. I doubt it'll be televised. If it is, you know, obviously we'll let you know. It starts at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So I should be travelling down on the morning and get on my hind legs. Well, I won't get on my hind legs. I'll get in a taxi and get across there, because I can't find my way around London. There's people that live in London can't find their way around London. It's a bit like Washington in that respect. So yeah, I mean, you know, we're starting to make inroads, I think. When you look at the situation as it has been in Holyrood over the last couple of days, yesterday particularly, the NNA has had representation there. The NNA has had its say. This is what the New Nicotine Alliance is about. It's about representing vapers in situations like this, where something can be done, where the voice of the vapor can be heard. And as we said earlier on, kudos to Andy Morrison, that's at GMFC Fantasy on Twitter, for getting across there and doing what he did. Well done, Andy. Proud of you, mate. And somebody somebody also said there was 3 people on that side of the table that buy pints for, and 1 person that chuck 3 pints at. I can't say I disagree. I think we'd probably better cut that as it stands now, because it's 23 minutes past the hour of 10 o'clock, which is, it's milk and cookies time.
It is.
That's only because the carbon dioxide that I put into my cider barrels run out, and I can't get any more of that out, so I'll have to drink milk now. But quick final word from let's VB, because VB is Scottish. Speak slowly, VB, so that the people in Canada can understand you.
As you said, it was fantastically promising. More of it. That's what we need. More of it. Fantastic stuff.
Yes, would you agree, Sav?
I would agree completely.
Excellent. Well, there you go. This is what happens when Matt takes a sabbatical. You get politics on a Wednesday night. Don't forget to tune in tomorrow to the Here's Hour. When will Keith and I'll have a bit natter through that, because I want to hear what Keith's take on it. I'm not going to show the whole thing again. I've cut a few sound bites out. We'll blast that up. But I'm actually quite optimistic about what happened today. And I might be talking DNA 200s. I might be talking spider mods as well. You've got no... Look, as Sav will tell you, and I'll put her on screen so you can see, I never know what I'm doing till I do it, do I, Sav?
Not a clue.
Yes, and the same goes for Keith. So there you go. Tune in tomorrow night for the Here's Hour. We'll have some fun, we'll have some laughs, we'll vape on, vape hard, and not let the bastards grind us down and all that kind of stuff. But from all of us here at VT Towers, for tonight, from Sav and VB, say good night, you two.
Good night.
Good night.
And from me as well, thanks for tuning in. I hope you found the whole thing educational, informative, instructive, and well, you know, it was fun, wasn't it? We'll see you all later. Until then, vape on, vape hard, all together now, and don't let the bastards grind you down. No, just don't do it. Cheerio.
Yeah, you know.